Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Monetizing the Customer's Emotional Journey. I'm Joe Ridholm, editor of Quirk's Marketing Research Review. And before we get started, just a few quick notes. You'll receive an email with a link to the recording of this event approximately 24 to 36 hours after we're through here today. And there will be time for questions after the presentation, so feel free to submit questions as we go, and we'll get to as many of them as we have time for at the end. Our presenters today are Chuck Bean, partner at the Martec Group, and Emily Anderson, who is a project manager at the Martec Group. And with that, I will hand things over to Chuck. Take it away, Chuck.
All right. Thanks, Joe. Hello, everybody. It's Emily and my pleasure to be with you today and have the opportunity to share some of our thoughts and some of the things that we've learned about how to monetize the customer's emotional journey. And as we get into this, we'll hopefully leave you with some valuable thoughts, and you'll walk away from the next 45 minutes to an hour with a better insight in terms of how to integrate emotions into your existing customer journey and customer experience work, or how to set sail on your own journey of learning how to do this. So quickly, we'll go through some high-level thoughts and themes to begin with. We'll start with some ideas on what are the key memorable moments in the journey. Some of this will be fairly masters of the obvious. If we could hear you, we'd probably hear some duh comments, but bear with us. These are important prefacing statements and thoughts that we believe present a logic and a framework for the rest of the doc. So it's important, but we'll move fairly quickly through that and get to the more valuable piece of today, which is how you look at emotions throughout the customer journey. And then really the most important part, how you can, once you understand the emotions, how do you translate that into action? How do you take knowing somebody's emotions, knowing somebody at a more personal level, a customer, an employee, a stakeholder, and actually design better journeys, better experiences using that knowledge. So first, though, a few overarching themes that are more fundamental to Martec and who we are, and you'll hear us talk about this throughout the day as well. This isn't a pitch. We're not here to do that. But it's important, we think, because first, simplicity is a key part of our business. We've been at this a long time, and one of the things we've noticed over that time is that oftentimes things like customer experience, customer journey mapping can get very complicated, sometimes overly complicated. And so it's important not only for you and your constituents, your clients, internal clients, but also for the customers themselves, or respondents in a research vernacular. So keeping things simple is going to be an important theme that we're going to talk about, and you'll hear again and again today. Looking at solutions that are scalable. Customer experience, customer journey mapping can tend to be fairly qualitative in nature, which is essential. We're going to talk today about how we balance quant and qual. And part of what that does is it enables customer experience, customer journey work with emotions to be scalable, to now get to a point where you can do things using larger sample sizes and have greater confidence around the work that you're doing. And then being seamless. And this kind of ties back to the first bullet of being simple, that the things that we're going to talk about are things that you can easily integrate with existing programs, existing platforms. This isn't something that you need to replace what you're doing. It's meant to augment and enhance what you're doing in customer experience, customer journey world. So that's the prefacing themes. We'll start with the duh observations. And so again, bear with us, but we feel like these are important. So today, even, I got an invitation from another firm promoting a webinar on the personal customer experience, and I'm sure that all of you on board for today's webinar can attest to that you understand this, that customer experience is personal, that it's about the preferences, past experiences, and in particular, the memorable moments that really drive our behavior as customers, employees, stakeholders. But what does that really mean? What does it really mean to get personal? And is that even doable? Can you really, particularly with some of the large universe markets that we're playing in these days, how can you get personal with that many people? And so what we look at is to design a personal experience, you obviously have to know the person. Again, obvious statement, but what does that mean? And so we show this picture of a family intentionally because it's in that line of thinking that you need to get with your customers, or at least to strive for the ability to know your customers the same way that you know a family member or a child, and that being able to respond to them, communicate with them in a way where you truly understand why they're doing what they're doing. Any of you with children can attest to the challenge that provides. But the pathway, the key to being able to do that is emotions. And no surprise here, given the title of our webinar, but emotions are the key to unlocking that knowledge of somebody at a personal level. Throughout their journey, customers have both positive and negative, pleasant and unpleasant emotions, and understanding what they're feeling, how they're feeling at the critical touch points is essential if you want to design truly great experiences. That the simple equation is that a great experience equals pleasant emotions outweighing the unpleasant emotions. And the greater you can shift that balance to the left, the stronger your experience will be. So the key is understanding their emotions. And again, I'll use the family example because I happen to be on vacation this week. And so as you understand, any parent can tell you that if you're on a journey with kids, it's a constant struggle to wrestle with how they're feeling and get that pleasant emotion to outweigh the unpleasant emotion, if for nothing else, for your own experience. So the emotions are important to understand, but the real thing to understand is that they embed our memories. And so if you think about milestones in your own life, if you think about the birth of a child, a wedding, special trips that you've taken, and the pleasant experiences and engagements equal those unforgettable experiences. And we're going to talk about that. Emily's going to speak to that here in a couple of minutes. And that it's also true, though, that you can have unforgettably bad memories. There was research done a handful of years ago that really hammers this home, we think. And it was actually a study done at the University of Iowa, and it was by somebody in the neuropsychology department who was looking at Alzheimer's patients and trying to understand the link between emotions and memory. And what the research unearthed was that emotions that get tied to a memory can actually linger longer than the memory. So if you think about people with amnesia or Alzheimer's, what they actually did was they would share some film clips that they knew would evoke certain emotions. I think the films were a sad scene from Forrest Gump, and then a funny scene from, I think, When Harry Met Sally. And with the patients, these Alzheimer patients, it would create the emotion, but within 30 minutes to an hour, they could not remember the film clip, but they still felt sad, or they still felt happy. The point of the research was intended to help people dealing with Alzheimer's patients that, it does matter what you say and do. Even though they might forget you 10 minutes later, the emotions will live on. That's also true for customers. And so it's a stark, powerful example of how, if you understand those emotions and how they tie to these memories, you can really create those great, strong experiences for your customers. So that's the end of the Masters of the Obvious portion of our presentation. We're now going to transition, and Emily's going to talk about that intersection of our memories and our experiences as customers and what that means for customer journey and customer experience. So Emily, take it away.
Thanks, Chuck. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm just going to speak a little bit today about how the customer experience is comprised of a few very memorable moments for the customer and then just kind of a lot of filler. And it's going to be understanding these memorable moments that's key to creating value for your brand. So the first step, of course, is finding those memorable moments along the customer journey. So the customer journey obviously has been studied for years. It's no new experience. It's nothing, no earth-shattering information. And we've compiled a bunch of different examples here for you to see kind of different industries. You know, there's a different customer journey for retail, for travel, for business, for restaurants, and no two are exactly the same. And so we just wanted to show a couple different examples here. So this last one I'm ending on is the Starbucks customer journey. As you can see, like most things at Starbucks, they've really got it down to a science. They know exactly who their customer is, what they're doing from the moment that they decide that they want a coffee until the moment that they leave the store and reflect on their experience at Starbucks. The important thing to remember, though, is that although your customers may feel different emotions throughout their journey, we'll show you which ones are the most important and how you can tweak them to leave a lasting impression for your customer. So let's take another look at this Starbucks customer journey. So this would be if I were to leave my office right now, walk down the block, and go get a cup of coffee at Starbucks. I took the typical kind of customer journey that Starbucks has mapped out for their own and then married it with my own. So I start by anticipating my coffee. So I'm sitting in the office, I'm bored, I need to take a little break, so I'm just gonna go grab a coffee down the block. But unfortunately it snowed last night. We got 3 or 4 inches here in Michigan, so I'm not really looking forward to the walk there, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I want my coffee. And then as soon as I get there, I'm excited, I smell the coffee, I'm ready for my drink, but then of course I have to get in line. So standing in line is arguably the worst part of my customer journey because I hate it. Maybe I'm behind 5 people, maybe they're taking forever to pay or they don't know what they want. So eventually I get to order and I trust that they're gonna make my drink right. I trust that they're gonna spell my name right on the cup. My name's Emily, it shouldn't be that hard. And then of course, after I order and pay, I have to go wait for my drink again, which it's not quite as bad as the initial wait because I know that my drink is coming any moment. So then at step 7, I get to actually enjoy my coffee. I get to maybe hang out for a few minutes, take a little break from work, and just enjoy myself. And then, of course, I don't want to leave because that means walking another block through the snow on my way back to the office. It means that I have to go back to work, which is sometimes fun, but sometimes not the best. And then afterwards, I reflect on my experience. You know, I love my coffee. I'll probably go back tomorrow anyway. And yeah, so that's just basically what my customer journey would look like if I left to go to grab a Starbucks right now. So in this way of looking at it, you can really see the peaks and valleys quite well, which leads us to our next point, why the peak and the end of the customer journey are so important, and the 2 points in the customer journey that you want to capitalize on to make the most value for your brand. So let's talk a little bit more about this peak end theory. So the peak end theory was first created by Daniel Kahneman, and it says that what matters most in the customer journey is the peak of the experience and then the end. So this is true for any customer journey regardless of industry. So all those examples I showed you a few slides ago will still benefit from this practice. So the trick is to find out which emotion your customers are feeling at both the peak and the end of the journey, identifying which emotion you want them to be feeling, and then how you can change their experience to get them feeling what you want them to feel. So I have a little bit of an example here. So in 2017, I flew to Peru, and I spent 4 days hiking to Machu Picchu, and it was something that had been on my bucket list for years, and I was so excited. I could barely contain myself, and you know, I had a great time. We whitewater rafted the Urubamba River, we mountain biked down the Andes Mountains, and we zip lined between canyons in the Sacred Valley. But the one memorable moment that will always stick out in my mind was the moment that I actually entered the gates at Machu Picchu. It was absolutely the peak of my journey. And then after a couple of days, we flew home and had a 13-hour layover. So it was not the ending that I needed or deserved in my life at that time, but it was the ending that's always going to stick in my mind. So those were my two memorable moments, actually entering the gates of Machu Picchu and then my 13-hour layover on the back end of the trip. So let's bring it back a little bit to a customer journey and brands that most of us are experienced with. We've all been to an Apple store. We've all been to Best Buy, I'm thinking. So let's talk a little bit about the difference of the customer journey at these two stores. So when you enter the Apple store, you immediately are greeted by somebody that's got a little tablet, and they help you find the right person so you can have some one-on-one guidance when you're making your decision. They're showing you how to use the latest gadget. You already know you're going to end up buying it. So when you decide on which model you want, you don't have to wait in line. The employee comes to you, they bring you your brand new phone or whatever gadget you're buying. They check you out right where you're standing. They smile, and they tell you to have a good day on your way out. So you're excited to play with your new toy. You're happy you had another positive experience at Apple. But at Best Buy, you walk in, you don't even know where to go. There's no intuitive place for you to walk to immediately. So eventually you find, say you're looking for a new camera. Eventually you find the camera section. You see 12 different cameras that basically all do the same thing. You're confused. You don't know which one it is, which one to get. There's 12 different brands, but they all say they do the same thing. So you're having a hard time selecting. And then on top of that, when you finally make your selection, you have to go stand in line. You have to wait. Then they check you out. And then to add insult to injury, on your way out the door, they check your receipt to make sure you paid for everything. So what do you think, which one of these experiences do you guys think is leaving a better impression in the customer's mind? The key for Best Buy would be to understand like what their customers are feeling as they're double checking your receipt on your way out the door, what they want their customer to feel at that moment, at the end of their journey, and how they can get there. So we've got another example here that has, this was created by our friends over at Northwestern University. So we've got a girl named Emma. She's buying she wants to buy a new car in the next 6 months. And so this is her customer journey of actually purchasing a new Toyota Prius, for example. So she already wants to buy a new car. She had never really considered the Toyota Prius, but then sees her friends tweet about it. So she starts researching it. She heads to TrueCar to see how much it costs. Then she posts on Facebook to see what her friends have to say. Her friends say that they love theirs. Their sister has one and she loves it. And then she's just checking the scores on ESPN.com for the football game that she's watching, and she sees an ad come across from Toyota advertising the year-end sale. So she decides that she's just going to go over to her dealer and test drive. So she loves her test drive. She's able to beat the pricing shown on TrueCar. So she ends up with her brand new Toyota Prius. So then, of course, as a millennial, the first thing she does is tweet about her experience, and all of her friends are so excited about her new Prius. So traditionally, in the traditional marketing funnel, Toyota would first build awareness, create an opinion in Emma's mind, push her to consider the brand, make her prefer it, and then eventually purchase it. So, however, it's 2019, and the customer journey is always evolving, so we can see how many levers on this customer journey, both big and small, touch her journey. So there are other brands that play a part here. So even though she's interacting with Toyota and Prius as brands, she's also touching Twitter, she's also touching TrueCar, she's also touching Facebook. So it's important to note that even if her end goal and her number one brand that she's interacting with is Toyota, there's still all kinds of other brands that interact with her here. So we at Martec agree, obviously, with the peak end theory. That's why we're talking to you about it today. But we think that Kahneman was missing one major point, which is the trigger point. So that's super important because what caused Emma to first react with Toyota in the first place? In this case, it was just seeing her friends tweet. So something as small and insignificant as scrolling Twitter made a life-changing decision for Emma. So these are the three key points that we want to talk to you a little bit more about and just show that they're both simple, they're doable, and they're going to lead to the most success for your brand. So at the end of the day, we see all of that. It's all fine and dandy seeing all of that information about what goes on in the customer journey. But the true important part is going to be what she's feeling. What is Emma feeling throughout her journey, and what pushes her to make a decision to go with a certain brand? So we've got a tool that can help you assess and analyze the emotions at each stage. Can you not hear me?
No, Emily, we can hear you still.
Oh, okay. So I was just going to say, we've got a tool that can help you measure the emotion at each memorable moment throughout your journey. So Chuck, are you there to take over?
Looks like Chuck might have to have dialed back in. Let's give him a few seconds here.
Okay.
Hello, this is Chuck. I'm back online.
Welcome back, Chuck.
Yeah, hey, that was exciting. That certainly demonstrates the peak and end of this journey.
Yeah, that was a low peak for this one. So we're ready for you, though, slide 18.
Good. Yeah, it's a good point, though. Peaks can be positive and negative. It's important to understand both. And I could tell you later how I felt about this peak moment. So I think the key thing we wanted to revisit again was the simplicity of what Emily was describing. That if you think about the examples that she showed early, one, there's a lot of language there. There's a lot of qualitative description going on. But two, there's just a lot. There's a lot of complexity at times in some of those customer journeys, and it can be difficult to digest and difficult sometimes to know where really to dive in and where to take the first bite of the elephant. So we feel like, again, those memorable moments, keeping it simple and focusing on those truly memorable moments that matter the most, those things that are going to linger on even after I may have forgotten the actual experience, are the most important. So the key is, how do we measure emotions at those memorable moments? Let me make sure there we go. So how can you measure emotions is the first question. And there are a lot of different techniques out there for measuring emotions. But as we go through these, I want you to think about the examples Emily gave of Best Buy, Apple, and some of the other experiences. How easy would it be? How seamless would it be to use these techniques to measure at or as close to memorable moments as you could? So there are a lot of physiological, biometric kinds of techniques for measuring how somebody's feeling their emotions. There are fMRI studies that are conducted. There are image based. In fact, we've used ZMET in the past ourselves successfully. There are language, linguistic, and psychology, or psychologically based techniques. Facial recognition and again, other image-based techniques and velocity-based techniques. So there's a number of ways that you can measure emotions, but how should you measure emotions? And we think that there is really an opportunity to do a better job as researchers and as people involved in the world of mapping journeys, understanding the experiences, and designing better customer experiences, to just quite simply do a better job of listening to the true voice of the customer. That in our history, we've seen that the use of language, the use of open ends, the use of other types of narrative techniques has dwindled over time, and this, we think, is a miss, that we're no longer truly listening to the voice of the customer. If all you're capturing in your research is a lot of numerical data, you're missing something. And so there's an opportunity to use and plug into existing techniques and upgrade the techniques. We spend a lot of time working with our clients to coach on how to get better voice of the customer, how to hear what they're saying, not just the numerical ratings. Those are important, but they're not enough. And so through IDIs, focus groups, the traditional qual and quant techniques, including surveys, and then some of the more, the relatively newer techniques of online focus groups and bulletin boards and diary studies and ethnographic work and even social monitoring, how can we get people talking? It's akin to putting a patient on a couch and saying, tell me how you feel. And so they're just recognize that there are a number of techniques to help you enhance and upgrade the way that you can get to that voice of customer. And then once you capture it, once you're listening, the key is to organize it. We hear clients all the time talking about that they're underutilizing or not extracting as much value as they think they should from their qualitative insights, from that voice of customer that they capture. Well, today, using natural language processing, NLP, we can help organize and help make the voluminous amount of qualitative data more digestible. So you start by saying, well, okay, I've captured all of this. I've done what you said. I've listened. Now I need to organize what I heard into topics. What were they talking about? So this was an example. This is some data taken from a community, a proprietary community we were working with, and looking at some posts that customers had after they had their first receipt of the deliverable. It was a curated kind of deliverable, and they would get it on a quarterly basis, and the client didn't understand what they were talking about. It wanted some clarity around that. So we were able to identify, here are the topics first, and then from there start to say, well, okay, we understand what they're talking about. They're talking about the box, they're talking about family and friends, et cetera, but what are the associated emotions with that? So once you can organize what they're talking about, what you're hearing, then you can start to understand the emotions associated with those topics. And then from there, you can start to map the journey. And so we use a technique that's based upon Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions. Some of you may have heard of this. It's something we could happily explain to you at a later time. But this is an example of how we can take the language that we identify, what people are talking about and the emotions associated with those topics, and map it across a journey. So in this example, we were looking at some personas. You see 4 different personas in the left side of that chart: direction taker, passive, willful, independent, depressed. These were the healthcare studies. We were looking at people dealing with weight issues and a potential new product. So we wanted to understand their journey and the emotions that they were feeling as they progressed through the journey. So you could see that the emotions shifted from left to right as we went from that trigger through the peak to the end. And in the very end, we were able to then map the concept. How did they feel if they could live in a potential future world? So even going beyond the end and saying conceptually, how would you feel if you could do this? And so you've now got a simple framework for mapping across a journey that ties back to some science, again, Plutchik's Wheel of Emotions. But so what? What do I do with this knowledge? So now I've got something where I understand the emotions at play at these memorable moments. How do I take understanding that joy or loyalty, these emotions are important? How do I take that and actually do something with that knowledge? That's what we'll talk about next. So in terms of using emotions to design better customer journeys, the first thing to focus on is that doing so, and really this ties back to the monetizing piece of our title, means you need metrics. And most customer experience measurement programs are not quantifying emotions. They're using metrics, certainly. CSAT, CES, likelihood to recommend, or NPS. But all too often, the CX, again, it's leaving that key emotional piece out, and again, not capturing that true voice of the customer. So with that understanding and having experienced it ourselves, we built a metric. We came up with an emotion metric that we call Martec's emotion score that measures those emotions at memorable moments or throughout the journey. And it is a conversion. It allows us to take language and words and generate a numerical representation of those words and of those emotions, and thereby plugs back in. So this is the seamless part of the theme we talked about early on. It gives us a metric that now can be used alongside of whatever metrics you may be comfortable using already. And we'll talk about why that's important on the next few slides, because what this enables you to do is really get a more holistic, balanced perspective of what's going on with the customer journey, both the emotions and the rational side of the brain, and using the full voice of the customer, the numerical and the words that they give to describe how they feel or to describe an experience. So that emotion score, Martec emotion score, is comprised of a number of things. It's basically looking at the balance of pleasant and unpleasant emotions or feelings somebody has about a topic. So back to the example I shared earlier from the community posts, we were able to identify what they were talking about, and then we could look at what are the emotions that they feel with that, and how many pleasant emotions, how many unpleasant emotions. Are those emotions conscious or non-conscious? So we're able to factor in and weight whether emotions are primarily conscious level or non-conscious level, and then really a strength of emotion, a passion level. All of that combined gives us then a numerical representation that we can look at in comparison to other metrics. So in this example, we did a study looking at 20 different brands across a number of categories, looking at how MES compared to the likelihood to recommend. And the outliers are where things get interesting. So that companies like Southwest or Subway are probably not seeing the results in their likelihood to recommend that they should, based upon having strong emotional connections. The MES scores are further out to the right with Southwest and Subway. Why aren't they further north on this chart? Why aren't they getting the likelihood to recommend? And that's something then that you can get to work on. But once you have this metric, what it enables you to do is to work on converting actions and understanding how the relationship between emotions and rational or functional levers works. And so this chart shows you a neural network map, really, and the human mind, this is how it's operating, that we're taking inputs that are typically functions. So it could be our prior experiences, a brand impression, some of the things that Emily was talking about with her example of Emma buying a Prius. Those inputs, those functions, then basically pass through a hidden layer of emotions and rational calculations, but primarily emotions that then deliver the output, deliver those metrics, whether it's an overall CSAT or the likelihood to recommend scores, what have you. So getting a metric into that middle part, that hidden layer, is what's key if you want to understand then which levers to pull. If I've identified that overarching NPS or likelihood to recommend or CSAT metric is the key for my business, and understand the input layers that go into that, I need to understand how to tie all of that together so that the emotions, the functions, and the metrics creates this holistic understanding of what's going on inside the customer's head at those memorable moments. So up until now, we didn't have data that fairly represented the emotions piece of that. So once we have that, what that allows us to do is look at MES across those memorable moments. So here's an example from a study we did in the banking world where we were looking at the beginning, the peaks, and the end point for a couple of different constituencies, the 50 and under crowd and the over 50 crowd, and looking at what kinds of emotions, what did the MES look like at these various stages. And we could identify that there were some gaps between what the over 50 crowd was experiencing at key memorable moments versus the 50 and under crowd. Once we identify those gaps, the ones that are meaningful and which memorable moments we need to focus on, then we could drill down to those specific emotions again and return to that emotion landscape that Plutchik's wheel provides us and look at, okay, well, we now know which emotions we need to work on. The key is, how do I get those emotions translated into action? And we'll use a different example for that. This is some work we did with an NBA team looking for, around the experience of attending a game, what were the key reasons. This team had a set of metrics that they were already measuring and looking at, and that they felt represented what were the keys for why people attended the games. By looking at the emotion score, we kind of rejiggered their perspective a little bit and identified that some of the metrics that they felt were important might actually be more fool's gold or secondary priorities in terms of what drives an emotional connection. And that the key to getting actionable emotional insights was in this left upper corner, in looking at things like business entertainment as a networking event and supporting the local community. And to whatever extent you could take these attributes and focus on those held the greatest opportunity for forming strong emotional connections at that moment. And so those are the areas that they need to focus on. Those are the triggers that you need to pull from a functional and a rational perspective in order to drive the emotions up and to create, again, that great experience that comes from having an imbalance, a stronger, pleasant profile versus the unpleasant profile. So what they were able to do was then look at, well, how do we communicate? What can we say to do that? And so that's where you can align communications accordingly. So imagine we've identified the emotions of joy. Well, it can be daunting to go to your team and say, all right, everybody, go out and make our customers feel joy. That's a little bit of a non-starter. Instead, if you can tell them, well, the pathway to joy is through focusing on supporting the local community or business networking at the event, that those attributes that we saw on this slide are the pathway. Those are the levers to pull that will generate joy. Go create messaging and align our communications accordingly. And so that's what we looked at, was A, B, C, D through L. All of those represent various messages that were tested to see whether or not they were going to evoke the right type of emotions. And E was the clear winner out of the group that we tested in terms of aligning the communications to resonate back with those customers and to evoke feelings of joy around that experience. So go back to the parenting example I provided early on. It's listening to the child and understanding how they're feeling and being able to then communicate in a resonant method and manner with them that then gets them into a balance of more pleasant versus unpleasant. So we're doing the exact same kind of thing with customers through these techniques. So the last thing we want to talk about before we open it up for questions is just a teaser for our next episode. Emily talked about, when she talked about the Northwestern work with the Prius example and Emma buying a Prius, we think there's a lot of value in looking at how that customer engagement, how that customer experience, particularly at the trigger point, is shifting to some extent, becoming more complex. Again, as you have more and more brands, the ecosystem is expanding. And so there are these brand dialogue behaviors that we've latched onto that we're working with and learning from Northwestern University again on how to look at that evolving space of the customer experience and the customer journey. And so when you think about all of the ways that we now feel or learn about brands and get engaged with brands from an early stage of observation, where we're sort of in the phase that Emma was in, of just hearing about something from a friend, you're just leaning back, taking a passive role. That's the observation, on up through participation, where she was getting involved with test driving and actually buying, and then co-creation, where then she becomes the closed loop and starts to actually post, write reviews, share word of mouth with her customers. So Northwestern is doing a lot of work around word of mouth, the value of reviews, et cetera. That's what we're going to be talking about when we next come back to you folks with our next webinar. So stay tuned for that. So in summary, customer experience should be simple. That there's a lot to take in, and particularly for those of you who may be early on in understanding how to do customer experience or customer journey mapping, it doesn't have to be complicated, particularly if you focus on the memorable moments. And it's proven that those memorable moments are linked to emotions. So to do that, you got to rejuvenate your voice of customer skills and truly listen to the words and stories of your customers. And that will allow you to translate what you hear into this new emotion metric, the Martec's emotion score. And by having that metric, you now have the ability to identify and close loop back to those rational functional levers and reprioritize what really matters in terms of creating great experiences by mapping back to those memorable moments. So that's it in a nutshell. Hopefully, as we said up front, this has been educational and informative, and we're certainly, Emily and myself, appreciate your time. And for any further information, please visit our website, call, or contact either one of us. We have case studies, ebooks, et cetera, that we can share and can get more in-depth than in this webinar tutorial. So we appreciate it, and I'll turn it back over to Joe.
Okay, thank you very much, guys. Had some good questions coming in here. Good. I want to start off with, how is MES different from NPS and other traditional metrics like that?
I'll take that one. Yeah. So we'd say fundamentally it's different because it's not a numerically based exercise. That we're not aware of any other metric that is developed using a multi-dimensional perspective like this, and that is derived from just purely the words that people share. So NPS is a straightforward single question. CSAT, CES, these are similar kinds of metrics. MES fundamentally is different because it's using language to come up with a numerical representation and score, and because it's balancing the conscious, non-conscious. So the way we get it is quite different. The way it looks at the end is similar, but that's so that it can be correlated and we can run the analytics that we need to, because we know that people are out there relying on and using metrics like NPS. So it has to be able to play nicely with those, but fundamentally it's derived in an entirely different way.
Sure. Are there any markets, where you think this approach wouldn't apply or wouldn't work?
There's definitely a spectrum of areas where it is stronger. We're a bit geeky in this regard and would say that emotions, just by the nature of the way our brains operate, any decision that a human being is making is infused with emotions, and it's important to understand those emotions. But realistically, there are markets, particularly some of the B2B markets, where it can be more challenging to get to those emotions. And on the flip side, the areas where it's absolutely essential, markets where we've been spending a lot of time, food and beverage, healthcare, finance, anything money related, anything personal, health, health and beauty, retail, those are ripe with emotions and well down the path of understanding customer experience. So these techniques, again, to our earlier statement, we don't expect these to be replacements. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to simply give people tools and techniques that they can inject into what they're already doing in those markets and turn on a light for understanding emotions. So there's a spectrum for sure.
Sure. Okay. Here's a good one. We have our customer journey mapped. Now what do we do?
Yeah, good question. We would say that if you have your customer journey mapped already, is to identify, have you identified the memorable moments? Have you really zeroed in and narrowed it down to just a few moments? And we understand that some companies are going to be much further along that progression, but if you've got a customer journey mapped, identifying the most memorable moments and then beginning to look at what people are telling you at those memorable moments. So in Emily's examples with Best Buy or Apple, if there are ways where you can get that true voice of customer as they leave a store or soon after they leave a store, or as close as you can to those memorable moments, just asking them simple, straightforward questions or asking them to tell you the story of what they just went through, then you can apply these analytics of, okay, I can use NLP to organize it, and I can use emotion intelligence and the emotion score to tell me how they feel, what they're feeling, and then tie it back to how do I improve that experience through those emotional levers.
Sure. Now, it looked like there were lots of quantitative charts and deliverables and things like that, but does MES deliver any more, qualitative types of output as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think MES is intentionally meant to be numerical so that it can plug into quantitative analytics, but the broader emotion intelligence practice area does, since we're dealing with language as an input, we definitely have outputs that are language based as well. One of the key things being, we talked about the example of generating messaging to test. We can provide to clients, to creative agencies, et cetera, an emotional thesaurus tied to specific emotions, so that if you want to evoke trust or joy or confidence, what words should you avoid? What words should you use when crafting your messages? So we can help with that. We're not copywriters, but we work with them and plug into them. So we can provide tools that are language based on the output side that will help clients, again, communicate more effectively, and drive more emotional connection through the language that they use in all forms, whether that's advertising copy, messaging, website, UX stuff, you name it. So yeah, there's a whole other battery of qualitative deliverables that we didn't spend as much time on today, but that are out there should anybody be interested.
Sure. I think we touched on this a little bit, but do you feel that this works as well for a B2B, for example, as like direct to customer experiences or more consumer-based types of experiences?
Yeah, let me clarify. That's a good. The most challenging B2B segments are going to be the ones where it's very small universe. Think of large chemical contracts or OEM tier 1 contract negotiations, where it's most of those teams, most of the people making those decisions don't want to think about emotions playing a role. So that's the most challenging. But when you get into B2B worlds where it's primarily small business driven, so building and construction, contractors, trades, healthcare, hospitals, et cetera, the automotive aftermarket, shops, technicians, repairs. So there's a slew of B2B markets, and it's all about whether somebody's a believer or not. If you buy into the fact that emotion is playing a role, then we can show you how that algorithm can work for you and map that experience. Ag is another one, farmers, et cetera, where you can. So the larger the universe, the better. But we like to believe it applies to all markets, just because that's the way the human brain works.
Had a couple questions along this line. I suppose it kind of depends on the project too, but can you talk a little bit about some of the sample sizes that you might use for studies like this?
Yeah, it varies dramatically because of the fact that we're using language. We can deploy these we've created MES based upon very small sample, 10, 15, 20 respondents from qualitative, think online bulletin boards or focus groups. It has to do with how much language you've collected. So how long are they talking to you? So if you have a session where I've got a customer talking for an hour to me, there's a lot of emotions in there that I can harvest and make sense out of. So in low sample sizes, it works as long as you've got sort of the depth in each record. It also works in typical sample sizes for other surveys, so N of 200, 300, 400 for any particular segment that you want to look at. So we've used MES and these emotion intelligence techniques in very small samples. We're also using it on very large samples, thousands of interviews, 25,000 in one case, looking at and using that to do a lot of emotion segmentation, which we kind of referenced early on, some of the personas in that healthcare example. Some of those personas can be developed or augmented using these same techniques, because we can look at how MES changes by demographics, by behaviors, by attitudes, et cetera. That's the beauty of tying it back to a numerical representation.
Sure. What kind of voice of the customer data do you need to generate or to get an MES score for your system? Does it need to be in text transcripts, survey results, audio files, things like that?
All of the above. We work with, ultimately we're going to convert everything into text to work with it. But if it's audio or video recordings, we can easily get that transcribed. But yeah, the basic raw material we're working with is words in a text file. And you can get that again through whatever means are available to you through the web, through web scraping, through your social sites, through survey work, through qualitative, et cetera. The best, what we always tell new clients is just, let's sign NDAs, et cetera, but then just let us take a peek at a slice of that data, and we'll be able to tell you whether it's suitable for these kinds of analyses or not. Just let us take a peek at what people are saying, and most often it is suitable. But occasionally it's not, and if not, then we can give you some guidance in terms of maybe the next time you go out to do research, maybe consider adding a question or tweaking some questions, and that should do it in terms of enabling you to get to that better listening stage, how you can really hear that voice.
Sure. This is one that might be tough to answer. Just they're asking about when the relationship is more long-term, like in education, where you go to a course or a university, I guess, over a number of years. How do you determine the peaks? I guess they're kind of getting at if it's just less of a transactional relationship, like going to Starbucks, if the person is a long-term relationship with, the organization that's being researched, how do you determine the peaks in that situation?
I think the key is what you just said, Joe. It's plural. It's peaks rather than peak. Is breaking up that longer journey into smaller journeys that constitute the longer term one. And again, going back to our keep it simple roots, it's certainly doable. We've done a lot of those kinds of studies. We actually are launching some work with charter schools looking at why parents send their kids to certain types of schools where we're having to consider that. So anytime you're looking at a lengthier journey, we would still want to break it up probably into some compartments and then work within those compartments to understand the sort of sub-peaks. And instead of ends, sort of the transitions that we'd be looking at.
Sure.
But the same theory can apply.
Sure. And another question here, too, just trying to get a little bit more at how the emotions are sort of defined. It says it was a little unclear to me how to go from having the words to the associated emotions. Can you explain how the emotions are derived or uncovered?
Yeah, so once we've got the language out on the paper and we've identified, we've listened, we've got the text, we've got people talking, we're using augmented intelligence. So we've got some proprietary patented technology that we use that is, we call it multidimensional sentiment analysis. So it looks deeper than just whether words are positive or negative or pleasant or unpleasant, but it basically looks at all of the words. We have artificial intelligence that looks at all of those words and identifies which words are actually emotions based on decades of research that we've got that built an emotion word dictionary. Once we've identified which words are an emotion, then we're using a variation of Plutchik's wheel to classify each of those emotions into those histograms and those bar charts that you saw. And so we're using augmented intelligence, meaning that AI does the first step, and then we've got a human element, which is, we call these folks e-coders, who look at the output from the machine and contextualize it, because you probably all heard the horror stories of how machines are using AI to look at language and they just botch it horribly. So we've got decoders that look at the context of what people are saying to make sure that the machine got it right. So between the human element and the artificial intelligence element, we're able to build those. It's something we probably need to spend more time with whomever asked that question, or I would encourage them to check out our ebook for a little bit more detail than we can probably provide
Sure.
on this call.
Well, we are almost at the top of the hour here, so I think that's about all we have time for today. But I want to thank Chuck and Emily and everyone at Martec, and also all of you out there for taking time out of your busy schedules to be with us here today. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.